A black honor student walks into class, only to hear his teacher sneer, "You don't really belong in calculus, do you?" The room goes silent, eyes watching, whispers spreading, the weight of humiliation crushing him. But then, instead of shrinking, he walks to the board, picks up the chalk, and begins to write. What happens next shocks the entire classroom and exposes a truth his teacher never wanted revealed. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The classroom smelled faintly of pencil shavings and old chalk, the kind of scent that clung to the walls of Jefferson High's math wing. It was an advanced calculus class, reserved for the district's best and brightest. The desks were arranged in tight rows, each seat filled by juniors and seniors who had been carefully groomed for this room, their GPAs and recommendations paving the way. But in the middle of the second row sat Malik Carter, a 17-year-old black student, whose quiet presence often seemed like an afterthought to the teacher. Malik never demanded attention. He didn't crack jokes to win laughs. He didn't raise his hand too quickly. He simply listened, absorbed and worked. But in this classroom, silence wasn't neutral. It became a cloak others draped over him, as though he wasn't even there. Mr. Lawson, the teacher, was a tall, lean man in his late 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and a stiff posture. His reputation was both feared and admired. He was tough but fair, students said. But Malik had already learned that toughness carried sharp edges when it was directed at him. Subtle at first, almost invisible to anyone else. Lawson calling on him less frequently, skimming over his raised hand, dismissing his correct answers with a flat while praising others for the same. On this Monday morning, the atmosphere felt different. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, striping the desks in pale gold, but the room was unusually hushed. Malik had been reviewing the lesson in his head, carefully solving last night's assignment before the bell rang. He was ready, or so he thought. "All right, class," Lawson began, tapping the chalk against the board with a snap that echoed like a gavel. "Today, we're pushing into differential equations. Some of you might thrive here. Some of you—" His eyes slid deliberately across the room, pausing for a beat too long on Malik. "Will find this territory beyond your comfort zone." The words carried no name, but the implication was clear. A few students exchanged smirks. One boy leaned sideways to whisper, his voice low but audible enough, "We all know who he means." Malik felt the heat creep up his neck, but he kept his gaze on his notebook, his pencil tip pressing an indent into the paper. Lawson continued, as though nothing had happened. He sketched a long equation across the board, chalk dust blooming in faint clouds. "This," he said with a flourish, "is where we separate those who belong from those who are merely taking up space." Malik's stomach tightened. He wanted to believe it wasn't about him, that maybe Lawson was just being dramatic, the way teachers sometimes were. But the silence in the room told a different story. It wasn't neutral silence. It was a silence of expectation, waiting to see if Malik would stumble. As Lawson turned back to face the class, his gaze landed on Malik again, steady and deliberate. He didn't need to say the name out loud. Everyone understood. Malik looked down quickly, heart thudding, the air thickening around him. This wasn't the first time. The humiliation had begun long before today, subtle enough that others could excuse it, but sharp enough that Malik carried the scars. When a problem went unanswered, Lawson's eyes flickered toward him with a smirk, as if to say, "Of course you wouldn't know." When a group project formed, Lawson would suggest Malik be the one to handle the presentation slides, rather than the calculations, cloaking it as fair division of labor. The pattern was clear. Malik was allowed inside the room, but never allowed to own it. He thought of his mother that morning, reminding him as she always did, "Don't let anyone make you small, Malik. You know what you're capable of." Her words echoed now, but inside this room, they felt thin against the weight of Lawson's authority. The class moved on, students jotting notes, the scratch of pencils filling the air. Malik tried to keep pace, copying formulas, but every line Lawson wrote seemed sharpened with hidden meaning. "Some of you might look at this and think it's impossible," Lawson said suddenly, turning from the board. His eyes darted to Malik again. "But then some of you probably shouldn't be here at all." The words fell like a stone into still water. The silence broke into a ripple of muffled laughter. Malik's hand froze mid-note. He didn't look up, but he could feel eyes on him, burning, measuring. For a moment, Malik considered raising his hand, challenging the remark. He knew the material. He had worked late into the night. solving problems until the numbers blurred. He could defend himself with knowledge, but something inside him warned against speaking up might only give Lawson another opening to cut him down. So he stayed quiet, his pencil hovering above the paper, his jaw tight. Inside, his thoughts spun wildly. Shame, anger, confusion, while outside he appeared motionless, invisible. The laughter died down, and the lesson dragged on. But the damage lingered. Every word that followed felt less like instruction and more like a performance staged around him, casting him as the fool before he'd even spoken. Near the end of class, Lawson closed his book with a snap. "Before we finish," he said, "let's see who's been keeping up." His eyes scanned the room, skipping past hands that twitched nervously, pausing in a long, heavy silence. Then, like a predator fixing on prey, his gaze locked on Malik. "Carter," he said flatly. The room turned toward Malik as if on cue. Lawson's lips curved into the faintest of smirks. "Why don't you show us if you actually belong here?" Malik's breath caught. The room was silent, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but heavy, charged, waiting for his humiliation to unfold. And in that moment, Malik realized the teacher wasn't just testing knowledge, he was questioning his very right to exist in this space. The teacher calls him out in front of the class, questioning if he even belongs there. Malik Carter sat frozen as the classroom's eyes bore into him, the teacher's words still hanging like smoke in the air. "Why don't you show us if you actually belong here?" The bell saved him from answering, its shrill ring scattering students into chatter and movement. Books slammed shut, backpacks zipped, sneakers squeaked across the floor. But Malik didn't move right away. His hands stayed on the desk, steadying himself against the weight of humiliation. He slipped out of the room quietly, head lowered, his shoulders tight. He could feel Lawson's gaze on his back as he left. A silent warning, "I'll be watching you." The hallway outside buzzed with noise, but Malik walked as though he were underwater. Each step carried the residue of the teacher's challenge, and though he kept his face blank, inside a fire churned. He wasn't angry in the way others might expect. No outbursts, no slammed lockers, but the quiet kind of anger, the kind that planted itself deep and grew roots. By the time he reached the school's front doors, Malik already knew the humiliation wouldn't end there. It never did. Lawson's words had followed him home before, carried in whispers from classmates or in the dismissive looks from people who assumed his presence in advanced classes was a mistake. The school was just one battleground. Outside, life demanded the same resilience, sometimes more. Malik lived on the south side of town, in a neighborhood where cracked sidewalks and weathered porches told stories of endurance. His family's apartment sat on the top floor of a 3-story building that overlooked a narrow street, lined with corner stores, church banners, and the occasional basketball hoop nailed to a telephone pole. It wasn't a place that outsiders romanticized, but to Malik, it was home. Alive with the sound of neighbors greeting each other, kids playing until the streetlights flickered on, and his mother's laughter echoing through the thin walls. His mother, Denise Carter, was the anchor of his world. She worked long shifts at the hospital, as a nurse's aide, her scrubs often wrinkled, her shoes worn thin, but her spirit unshaken. Every night, no matter how late she came in, she made time to check on Malik's progress. She never pretended it was easy. Life rarely was, but she reminded him of his worth when the world tried to strip it away. "You got a gift, Malik," she told him often, usually while heating leftovers at midnight. "Don't let anybody trick you into thinking you don't. Numbers don't lie, baby. People do." Malik's love for mathematics had started quietly, long before Jefferson High. As a child, while other kids played video games, he spent hours piecing together puzzles, scribbling patterns on scraps of paper, or solving riddles his grandfather gave him. The first time he learned multiplication tables, he treated them like secrets to unlock, racing himself to see how quickly he could find answers. By middle school, he was teaching himself advanced concepts from borrowed library books, diving into algebra and geometry with the same hunger some kids brought to sports. But passion alone didn't shield him from racism's bite. At the grocery store, clerks trailed him through aisles, assuming theft rather than curiosity. On buses, people clutched their bags tighter when he sat down, even though he carried nothing but textbooks. And in school, teachers sometimes praised his work as surprising, in tones that felt more like disbelief than encouragement. Malik never complained out loud. He carried the moments in silence, storing them like equations in a notebook, waiting for the day he could prove himself beyond doubt. His nights were rituals of discipline. He would spread his textbooks across the small kitchen table, his notebook stacked in neat piles, pages filled with tiny equations written in his meticulous hand. The hum of the refrigerator kept him company, along with the occasional siren wailing past the window. He studied while the city slept, pencil scratching until his wrist ached. When exhaustion pressed on him, he'd take short breaks, leaning back in the chair, staring at the ceiling as if the numbers danced there. The challenges weren't just about passing classes. They were his escape, his way of bending the world into something that made sense. Numbers obeyed rules, even when people didn't. Equations respected logic, even when society didn't respect him. One night, after hours of working through differential equations far beyond his coursework, Malik closed his notebook and whispered to himself, "I know this stuff. No one can take it from me." But in the morning, that confidence was tested the moment he stepped back into Jefferson High. The school's hallways told a different story from his late-night brilliance. Here, Malik wasn't the quiet genius at the kitchen table. He was just another black student who people assumed couldn't possibly belong in advanced calculus. His classmates rarely said it directly, but their glances did. When group assignments came, they paired with each other quickly, leaving Malik the last pick. Even the school counselor, Mrs. Whitaker, once suggested with a tight smile that a more balanced schedule might ease his stress, hinting that perhaps calculus was unnecessary for someone like him. Malik had nodded politely, but walked out, knowing what she meant. Still, he carried himself with patience. He wasn't loud, wasn't confrontational. He believed his work would speak louder than words. But Mr. Lawson saw patience as weakness. It was Wednesday morning when the trap began to set. The class had barely settled when Lawson strode in, his tone clipped, his mood sharper than usual. He wrote a complex problem on the board without introduction, chalk squealing against the surface. The students exchanged uneasy glances. "This," Lawson said, dusting his hands, "is what separates those who are prepared from those who are wasting everyone's time." Malik felt his chest tighten. The words weren't new, but the weight of Lawson's stare made it clear who the target would be. The teacher wasn't content with small humiliations anymore. He wanted a spectacle. Malik copied the problem carefully, his pencil trembling slightly. He recognized the structure. It was difficult but solvable. He had worked through similar equations late at night, pushing himself beyond the curriculum. He could solve it. He knew he could. But Lawson wasn't after the answer. He was after Malik's composure, his dignity. As the teacher scanned the room, his eyes landed on Malik again. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that wasn't kind at all. "Carter," he said, his voice slicing through the quiet, "why don't you come up here and show the class just how much you really know?" The class turned in unison, whispers already rising. Malik's stomach dropped. He could feel his mother's words echoing. "Numbers don't lie, baby. People do." The chalk rested in Lawson's hand like a weapon, waiting to be handed over. Despite his quiet brilliance, the teacher sets a trap for him in front of everyone. The classroom's air seemed heavier as Malik stood slowly, his chair scraping softly against the tile. All around him, students shifted in their seats, some leaning forward with anticipation, others smirking like they'd been waiting for this moment. Mr. Lawson, still at the front of the room, twirled the chalk between his fingers before holding it out, his expression sharp with expectation. Malik walked to the board, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the floor. Every step felt amplified, the silence pressing down on him like an invisible weight. He took the chalk, its dust clinging to his fingertips, and faced the equation already scrawled across the board. It was familiar, dense, layered with symbols and notations, but not impossible. He had worked through similar problems at home, nights when the world was asleep, his only company the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. But here, in front of 30 pairs of eyes and one hostile teacher, his mind faltered. "Go on," Lawson said smoothly. "Show us." Malik raised the chalk and wrote the first line of his solution. His handwriting was steady, his steps logical, but Lawson's voice cut through the silence before he could finish the second step. "Really?" the teacher scoffed. "You're starting there?" A ripple of laughter rose from the back row. Malik froze. He had chosen a perfectly valid starting point, but the way Lawson framed it made it sound absurd. Malik glanced over his shoulder, his stomach tightening as a few students covered their mouths to hide smirks. He turned back to the board, forcing himself to continue. He wrote another line, moving more quickly this time, determined to silence the whispers. His steps were sound, each transition correct. But again Lawson interrupted. "Are you sure about that?" The teacher tilted his head, voice dripping with mockery. Seems like a bold choice for someone who's usually so quiet. More laughter. This time it wasn't hidden. It was open, cruel, and it stung. Malik felt the heat creeping up his face, his hands clammy against the chalk. Inside, his thoughts scrambled. Why is he doing this? These steps are right. He knows they're right. But logic wasn't the point. The performance was the point. Lawson wasn't testing knowledge. He was testing dignity. Malik hesitated, the chalk hovering above the board. That moment of pause was all the class needed. The laughter grew, joined by whispers that seemed to echo louder than they were. Man doesn't even know what he's doing. Someone muttered. Shouldn't even be here. Another whispered. Malik clenched his jaw. He wanted to shout back, to defend himself, to remind them that he had spent hours preparing, that he understood these equations better than most of them ever would. But his throat closed, the words stuck behind the lump of humiliation pressing upward. Lawson stepped closer, his shoes clicking against the tile. He gestured at the board with his chalk. Here's the thing about mathematics, he said, his tone shifting into lecture mode, though his eyes stayed locked on Malik. It's not just about showing up, it's about belonging. Some people have the instincts, the natural ability. Others, while they struggle, they reach above their station. The words cut deeper than the laughter. Malik wasn't being critiqued as a student. He was being dismissed as a person, above his station. The phrase hung in the air like a verdict. Malik swallowed hard, staring at the half-finished problem on the board. He knew the next step. He knew how to reach the answer. But the room had already turned against him. No matter what he wrote now, Lawson would twist it, and the class would laugh. Cat out your tongue, Carter, Lawson smirked. Or do you just need more time than the rest of us? The snickers rolled through the room again. Malik lowered the chalk slowly, his shoulders heavy, his mind clouded. He felt the sting of isolation, not just from the laughter, but from the silence of those who knew better. A few students avoided his gaze, shifting uncomfortably. They knew the treatment was unfair, but no one spoke. No one intervened. The silence hurt almost as much as the ridicule. When the bell finally rang, it didn't bring relief. The laughter still clung to him as he returned to his seat. His notebook felt heavier, his hands trembling as he packed his bag. He didn't look at anyone. Lawson called after him casually, almost as if it were a joke shared between them. Better luck next time, Carter. Maybe calculus isn't for everyone. The words echoed in Malik's ears as he left the room. Not for everyone. He walked down the hallway with his eyes fixed on the floor, each step pounding with a rhythm of humiliation. His classmates' voices trailed behind him, some mocking, some indifferent, none defending. By the time Malik reached the stairwell, his chest burned. He gripped the railing tightly, steadying himself. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the walls, to escape the weight of the stairs. But beneath the shame, another fire stirred. That evening, back at the apartment, Malik spread his textbooks across the kitchen table again. The laughter still rang in his ears, but instead of silencing him, it sharpened his focus. He worked through the same problem Lawson had mocked him with, line by line, until the solution filled 3 pages of his notebook. The steps were flawless. His logic was airtight. He whispered the answer to himself, tasting the quiet victory. I knew it all along. He wanted me to fail, not to learn. Denise came home late, her scrubs wrinkled, her hair pulled back. She saw the papers spread across the table, and the exhaustion in her son's eyes. You're still at it, she asked gently, setting her keys down. Malik nodded. I have to be ready. They don't want me there. Denise's gaze softened, but her voice carried steel. Then you make sure they can't ignore you. You hear me? You let your work speak louder than their hate. Malik closed his notebook slowly, his mother's words echoing. His humiliation wasn't the end. It was fuel. The next morning, he walked into class with a quiet determination, his notebooks tucked under his arm. He avoided Lawson's eyes, kept his head down, but inside, something had shifted. Lawson noticed. He always noticed. As Malik slid into his seat, Lawson smiled faintly, a predator sensing resistance. He uncapped a marker, turned to the board, and began writing another problem, more complex, more layered, designed not to teach but to expose. The class fell silent, the challenge hanging heavy in the air. Students leaned forward, eager for the show. Malik knew what this was. He knew Lawson wasn't done. And for the first time, Malik didn't just brace himself for humiliation. He braced himself to fight back, not with anger, but with brilliance. Instead of shrinking away, he resolves to prove himself in a way no one expects. The humiliation in Mr. Lawson's classroom didn't end at the ringing of the bell. It traveled with Malik into the hallways, attaching itself like a shadow. The laughter that had once been contained within four walls became whispers that echoed through the corridors, passed from mouth to mouth until they turned into something sharper than truth, rumors. By the second day, Malik noticed the way students' conversations shifted when he walked by. A group near the lockers fell silent as he passed, then broke into muffled chuckles once he was a few steps away. Another group wasn't as discreet. "He's not that smart," one boy muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "Did you see him freeze? He's just lucky to even be in that class. Probably just a diversity pick," another added, his tone dripping with the false confidence of someone repeating what he'd heard. The words sank into Malik's skin, like splinters. He kept his head down, his face unreadable. But inside his chest, something burned. He had worked harder than anyone in that room, sacrificing sleep, meals, and time with friends, just to master equations others skimmed over. Yet all of that effort had been erased in a single moment of ridicule. At lunch, Malik sat alone at a corner table, with his tray untouched. He pulled out his notebook, as he often did, hoping numbers might drown out the noise. But even then, the whispers followed him. Two girls walked by, whispering loudly enough for him to hear. "I heard he almost cried in front of everyone," one said. "Doesn't surprise me," the other replied. "He's just not cut out for that level." Malik's jaw tightened. He closed his notebook slowly, pushing it back into his backpack. The food on his tray sat untouched, the smell of fries and pizza nauseating now. He wanted to tell them the truth, that he knew the answer, that Lawson had twisted the situation against him. But defending himself out loud would only make him look desperate. The rumors didn't need truth to grow. They only needed silence. That evening, Malik returned home, exhausted. He dropped his backpack on the kitchen chair and sank onto the couch. Denise, folding laundry in the corner, noticed the heaviness in his movements. "Rough day?" she asked gently. Malik hesitated, then shrugged. "It's whatever." Denise studied him, sensing the weight he carried, but knowing he wouldn't spill it easily. She didn't press, but she spoke softly, her voice steady. "Remember what I always tell you. They don't get to define you. You know who you are." Malik nodded, but the reassurance didn't land the way it used to. Words couldn't compete with whispers that spread like wildfire. By Friday, the rumors had evolved into labels. "He's only there because of quotas. He's just filling a seat. He doesn't actually understand the material. He's just lucky." Each statement carried more venom than the last, and each one chipped away at Malik's resolve. It wasn't just classmates now. He noticed the way some teachers looked at him too. Hesitant, skeptical, as if wondering whether the rumors were true. In history class, he raised his hand to answer a question, and the teacher skipped over him, choosing another student instead. In the cafeteria, the usual cashier who joked with him offered only a curt nod. It was as if his humiliation had branded him, marking him as less than. The isolation was unbearable, but Malik refused to show it. He moved through the days quietly, his expression calm, his eyes fixed forward. Inside, though, the fire grew hotter. The twist came unexpectedly. That afternoon, while grabbing his notebook from his locker, Malik overheard two boys from his calculus class whispering by the drinking fountain. "Lawson's setting up something big next week," one of them said. "Like what?" the other asked. "A challenge, some kind of advanced problem. He said he wants to separate the real students from the pretenders." The boys laughed, slapping each other on the back before walking away. Malik stood frozen, his notebook in hand. A challenge. His stomach tightened. He didn't need anyone to tell him who Lawson was targeting. The so-called pretender was him. That night, Malik couldn't focus on anything else. He sat at the kitchen table again, papers spread around him, his pencil moving furiously across the page. He worked problem after problem, his mind racing. Each solution felt like a weapon he was sharpening, each line of numbers a shield he built against humiliation. But beneath the determination, doubt gnawed at him. Lawson wasn't simply testing knowledge. He was orchestrating a spectacle. Malik knew the trap wouldn't just be about solving the problem, it would be about enduring the ridicule that came with it. Denise walked in around midnight, tired from her shift. She saw the storm in her son's eyes. The stack of papers filled with equations, and sat across from him. "What's going on?" she asked quietly. Malik exhaled slowly. "He's planning something. A challenge. I heard some kids talking." Denise's expression hardened. "And you think he's going to use it against you?" Malik nodded. She reached across the table, resting her hand on his. "Then you make sure you're ready. You don't let him take your brilliance from you. You hear me? You fight back, not with anger, but with proof." Malik swallowed, his throat tight. "What if proof isn't enough?" Denise squeezed his hand. "Then you show them anyway. You keep showing them until they can't deny it." The next morning, Malik walked into school with his backpack heavier than usual. Not from books but from the weight of what was coming. He moved through the halls quietly, his face calm but his ears caught every whisper, every label thrown his way. Diversity admit. Not that smart. Pretender. Each word cut, but each one also fueled him. They thought he would shrink. They thought the rumors would bury him. But Malik knew the truth. If Lawson wanted a spectacle, Malik would give him one. He discovers an upcoming calculus challenge the teacher plans to use against him. Malik left school on Friday, with the whispers still clinging to him, each one heavier than the textbooks in his backpack. Pretender. Diversity admit. Not that smart. By the time he reached his block, the afternoon sun had already begun to sink behind the row of tired buildings. Kids played tag in the street, their laughter carefree, but Malik walked past them without looking up. The rumors weren't just in school. They seemed to follow him everywhere, stitched into the air he breathed. Inside the apartment, Denise greeted him with her usual smile, but even she noticed the stiffness in his shoulders, the haunted look in his eyes. She didn't push. She knew better than to pry when Malik carried the weight of school on his back. Instead, she reheated leftovers and left him to his notebooks at the kitchen table. By nightfall, the table was buried under papers. Malik scribbled equations in the margins, filling sheet after sheet until the pencil marks blurred. He paused only to stretch his aching wrist, then dove back in, muttering formulas under his breath. He wasn't just studying, he was armoring himself. The internet became his second classroom. He found lectures posted by professors at MIT and Stanford, long videos with voices that carried clarity his own teacher denied him. Malik played them on loop, pausing to jot notes, rewinding to make sure he didn't miss a single step. One night, as the city outside his window fell quiet, Malik solved a problem so complex it stretched across 4 pages. When he finally reached the solution, a small smile tugged at his lips. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the smile faded. A thought stabbed through him. What if none of this matters? What if he humiliates me no matter how right I am? The fear didn't erase his progress, but it sat in the back of his mind like a shadow. Malik pressed harder against it, doubling down, drowning the doubt in numbers. Denise often woke in the middle of the night to grab a glass of water, and found her son hunched over the table, the glow of the desk lamp outlining his tired face. "You can't keep burning yourself out like this," she said one night, her voice soft but firm. Malik didn't look up from his notes. "I don't have a choice." "You do," she countered, stepping closer. "You have a choice to rest, to believe that you're enough as you are." Malik finally met her gaze, his eyes bloodshot but steady.
"Mom, they don't think I belong there."
"If I slip once, if I give them any reason, they'll never let me forget it. I have to be perfect." Denise's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him he didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but she knew the world he lived in didn't work that way. Instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Then make perfect look effortless. Show them what they can't take away." The nights blurred together. Malik's room remained dark while the kitchen light burned, the hum of the refrigerator his constant companion. He solved equations until his head throbbed, then solved them again just to be sure. His notebooks filled with dense scribbles, lines of logic stacking into towers of proof. But with every correct answer came a wave of self-doubt. What if Lawson throws something completely new at me? What if the class laughs again? One night he sat back in his chair staring at the pages scattered before him. He pressed his palms against his eyes, whispering into the silence. "Am I enough?" No answer came. Only the sound of the city outside, the distant honk of a car, the soft rumble of the subway below. Saturday brought an unexpected twist. Malik had planned to spend the day at the library, but when he arrived he overheard 2 classmates studying near the back tables. "Lawson said it's gonna be brutal," one boy whispered, "like harder than anything we've done." "Yeah," the other laughed, "but it's worth it. He wants to expose Carter for what he really is." Finally, Malik froze. The book in his hand suddenly heavy. They weren't just rumors anymore. This wasn't paranoia. Lawson was openly telling students his plan to use the challenge as a weapon against him. The realization stung deeper than any whisper. Malik wasn't just fighting for respect. He was fighting against a teacher determined to see him fail. He left the library without checking out the book. Back at home, he redoubled his efforts, pages flying as he drilled problem after problem, his pencil scratching furiously. By Sunday night, the exhaustion was visible. His eyes carried dark circles. His hands trembled slightly from lack of sleep, but he didn't stop. Denise found him at the table again, his head nearly drooping over his notes. "Malik," she said softly, brushing his hair back. "You need to rest." He shook his head. "If I rest, he wins." Denise hesitated, her heart aching, then kissed his forehead. "Then win, baby. But don't lose yourself in the fight." Malik closed his eyes briefly, then returned to his work. Monday morning arrived before Malik was ready. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, sharp and unforgiving. He dressed slowly, his body heavy, but his mind alert. He had sharpened himself through nights of fire and fear, and now it was time to step into the arena. At school, the whispers hadn't died. If anything, they had grown louder. But Malik didn't flinch. He walked to class with his head held steady, his notebook stacked neatly under his arm. When he entered the calculus room, Lawson was already at the board, writing a massive equation across the surface. His back was straight, his movements deliberate. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Lawson capped the marker, turned slowly, and smiled in a way that carried no kindness. "Today," he said, his voice calm but cutting, "we're going to test the limits of who belongs here." His eyes landed directly on Malik. The day of the test arrives, and the teacher sharpens the blade of humiliation. The classroom hummed with the faint scrape of chairs and the rustle of notebooks as students settled in. Malik sat in the second row, his notebook stacked neatly, his pencil gripped tightly in his hand. The weekend's sleepless nights still weighed on him, dark circles under his eyes, a stiffness in his shoulders, but there was also a quiet fire in his chest. Mr. Lawson turned from the board, marker still in hand, and let the silence stretch. His gaze swept across the room, pausing deliberately on Malik before he spoke. "Today we're doing something different," Lawson announced, his voice steady and loud enough to cut through the silence. "No textbook drills, no guided practice. Today we test who actually belongs in this class." The room went still. Students exchanged uneasy glances. The phrase "who belongs" wasn't neutral. Everyone knew exactly what Lawson meant. He uncapped a fresh marker and began scrawling an equation across the whiteboard, the sound squeaking with each line. It wasn't a standard homework problem. It sprawled across the board, dense, layered, intimidating, derivatives nested inside integrals, variables tangled in trigonometric functions. Even the strongest students in the room shifted nervously in their seats. When he finished, Lawson stepped aside and dusted his hands as though he had crafted a masterpiece. "This," he said with quiet triumph, "isn't in your book. It's a test of instincts, of brilliance. Some of you might get close, but only the truly capable will finish it." His eyes found Malik again, locking on with surgical precision. "And some of you," he added, "will be reminded why they should think twice before sitting in this room." The words hung heavy in the air. A few students chuckled nervously. Others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting toward Malik, then quickly away, as if they didn't want to be caught looking. Malik felt his chest tighten, his breath shallow. He recognized parts of the problem. He had seen fragments of equations, like this during his long nights of study, but the way Lawson had layered them together made it deliberately overwhelming. This wasn't just difficult, it was designed to crush whoever attempted it. And Malik knew exactly who Lawson expected to fail. "Who wants to try?" Lawson asked, feigning fairness, his marker tapping idly against his palm. A few hands half rose, then sank again. No one wanted to be the guinea pig. Lawson smiled thinly. "No volunteers?" His pause was calculated, theatrical. "Then perhaps it's time we see if Carter is ready to prove he's not just taking up space." The class turned as one, their eyes zeroing in on Malik. The silence deepened, the kind that wasn't empty but charged, waiting for the inevitable. Malik's fingers tightened around his pencil. He could feel every gaze, like a weight, pressing down on him. His first instinct was to shrink, to avoid the spotlight, to let someone else take the fall. But then his mother's voice echoed in his mind. Don't let anyone make you small. Show them what they can't take away. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady his nerves. He had prepared for nights like this, prepared until his eyes burned, until equations filled his dreams. The problem was a monster. Yes, but not invincible. He had seen monsters before. Lawson stepped closer, extending the marker toward him like a challenge. Well, Carter, care to show us if you belong? The unexpected twist came from the back of the room. Why don't you solve it, Mr. Lawson? A voice called out. It was Jacob Whitfield, one of the few students who rarely spoke. The class turned, surprised. Jacob wasn't defending Malik directly. He was mocking Lawson. The jab landed, and for a flicker of a second, Malik saw Lawson's jaw tighten. But Lawson recovered quickly, his smirk returning. I don't need to prove myself, Mr. Whitfield. I've already done the work. This is for students who think they're ready, and Carter here claims he is. The attention swung back to Malik. Jacob leaned back in his chair, muttering, Good luck, man, but his voice carried no malice. It was the closest thing to solidarity Malik had felt in weeks. Still, the challenge was undeniable. Malik rose slowly from his seat, his heart thundering in his chest. His legs felt heavy, as if each step toward the board carried the weight of every rumor, every whisper that had followed him for weeks. Pretender, diversity admit. Not that smart. When he reached the front, Lawson handed him the marker with exaggerated politeness, his smirk daring Malik to crumble. Malik took it, his fingers trembling slightly, and turned toward the board. The equation loomed before him, sprawling and intimidating. He could feel 30 pairs of eyes drilling into his back, waiting for the show. For a moment, Malik froze. His mind screamed, what if I mess up? What if they laugh again? But then, beneath the fear came another thought, quiet but steady. What if I don't? He inhaled deeply, blocking out the whispers, the smirks, even Lawson's piercing gaze. All that mattered was the board, the numbers, the logic. He had spent countless nights preparing for this. This was his battlefield, his language, his truth. His hand lifted, the marker hovering near the first symbol. The silence in the room was suffocating. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. At the last moment, Lawson leaned in, his voice low enough for only Malik to hear. Remember, Carter, one mistake, and they'll see you for what you really are. The words cut like a blade, but they also sparked something unexpected. Instead of fear, Malik felt a surge of defiance. He wasn't going to let Lawson write his story. He pressed the marker firmly against the board, ready to begin. Every eye in the classroom was locked on him. Every breath waited. The student takes the chalk, all eyes locked on him. The marker trembled slightly in Malik's hand as he faced the sprawling problem on the board. The room was silent, yet the silence wasn't empty. It was a silence filled with expectation, with hunger, with the subtle hum of 30 students waiting for a spectacle. They weren't just watching for the answer, they were watching him. Malik swallowed hard, feeling the sweat gathering at his temple. For a moment, the world blurred. The board, the equations, even his own heartbeat. Then he remembered the long nights at the kitchen table, the whispered mantras of his mother. Numbers don't lie, baby. People do. He exhaled, and placed the first line on the board. A clean, precise derivative. The chalk squeaked faintly, but his hand steadied. The numbers fell into place the way he'd practiced. The class shifted. The silence grew heavier, sharper. They had expected hesitation, fumbling, failure. Instead, Malik's first step was flawless. Lawson's smirk flickered, just for a moment, before returning. He clasped his hands behind his back, watching carefully. Malik continued, writing the second line. His handwriting was small but deliberate, each symbol chosen with clarity. He moved like someone who knew the territory, not rushed, not reckless, but methodical. By the third line, even the students who had been whispering pretender only days ago leaned forward in their seats. Malik could feel the shift in the room behind him. Their laughter had stopped. He paused, not because he was lost, but because he was organizing his thought. He remembered the trick from one of the late-night lectures he'd watched online, an approach that cut through the mess of symbols like a blade through tangled rope. With careful precision, he applied it now, restructuring the problem in a way that simplified the chaos into something manageable. When the transformation appeared on the board, a few gasps broke out in the room. Wait, how did he do that? One student whispered, "That's actually smart." Another muttered, The same voices that once mocked him now carried unease. Malik didn't turn around to see their faces, but he could feel the energy shift. For the first time since stepping up, a calm washed over him. The fear was still there, humming beneath the surface, but it was no longer in control. He focused on the numbers, letting them guide him, drowning out the eyes burning into his back. Step after step, line after line, the solution began to take shape. His movements grew smoother, his writing faster. He wasn't rushing, he was flowing. Each number was a reminder of the countless nights he had spent preparing, each line a rebuttal to every whisper that called him unworthy. Lawson, however, wasn't done. "Careful, Carter," he interjected, his voice calm but edged with condescension. "Wouldn't want to embarrass yourself halfway through." Malik froze for half a second, the marker hovering. The old fear tried to creep back, whispering, "What if he's right? What if I slip?" But then another voice rose inside him, stronger this time. "Keep going." Without responding, Malik placed the marker back on the board and continued. His silence was louder than any rebuttal could have been. The class took notice. By the sixth line, Malik had done something unexpected. He had cornered the problem into a form that made sense, one that was clear even to the students who had given up on understanding it. They leaned in, whispering among themselves, "He's actually nailing it. I thought Lawson set him up to fail."
This is crazy.
The unease in their voices carried weight. Malik wasn't just solving a problem, he was dismantling the narrative built against him. Halfway through, Malik paused again, staring at the board. The problem had morphed into its most difficult stage, the part Lawson had likely chosen deliberately. It was the moment designed to break confidence, to make anyone falter under pressure. Lawson stepped forward slightly, his smirk widening. "Well, that's where most students get stuck," he said, his tone almost playful. "It's all right if you don't know what to do, Carter. No shame in admitting limits." The class held its breath. Malik gripped the marker tighter, his heart pounding. The calm that had carried him this far wavered, and for a flicker of a moment, doubt returned. He saw the complexity before him, the layers of calculus that seemed to stretch endlessly, and he wondered if this was the moment Lawson had been waiting for. But then, deep in the recesses of his memory, Malik recalled something from his late-night study session, a lecture where the professor had said, "The trick is not to see the problem as one massive wall, but as smaller doors hidden within it." His breathing slowed. The board was a wall, yes, but he had the keys. He just needed to find the right door. He lifted the marker again, ready to push forward. And that was when the class, once again, leaned in as one, the room balanced on a knife's edge. Halfway through, the problem gets harder. Will he falter? The marker in Malik's hand hovered above the board, his eyes fixed on the complex knot of equations that sprawled across the white surface. He could feel the room breathing behind him. 30 students waiting, 30 minds asking the same question. Will he fold? The air was heavy, still. Then, cutting through the silence, came Mr. Lawson's voice. "Careful now, Carter," Lawson said, his tone silky, every syllable laced with condescension. "It's easy to get lost when you wander this far above your level." The words sliced through the fragile calm Malik had built. A ripple of chuckles spread from the back of the room, hesitant but cruel. Malik tightened his grip on the marker. His first instinct was to turn around, to defend himself. But he remembered the trap. Lawson didn't want the problem solved. He wanted Malik rattled. So Malik forced his focus back onto the board. Numbers don't lie. People did. He drew a careful line, breaking down the larger equation into smaller fragments. The motion was deliberate, steady. As he wrote, the complexity began to untangle, and whispers rippled through the class again. Not mocking this time, but astonished. "He's doing it," one student murmured. "No way," another whispered. But Lawson wasn't ready to give up his grip on the room. "Interesting choice," Lawson said, stepping closer. "Of course, most students wouldn't start there. But I suppose creativity is one way to cover up confusion." The smirk that followed was meant to land like a blow. Malik's stomach twisted, but he didn't falter. He wrote the next line, steady, his movements unbroken. Lawson circled him like a predator. "Class, pay close attention," he said. "This is what happens when someone tries to punch above their weight. They might look confident at first, but watch closely. Mistakes creep in." The words weren't instruction. They were an attack, disguised as teaching. The class fell into a tense silence, waiting for Malik to stumble. Malik could feel the eyes burning into his back, His pulse pounded in his ears. The whispers from last week replayed in his mind. Pretender. Diversity. Admit. Not that smart. But louder than the whispers was the voice of his mother. Make perfect look effortless. Show them what they can't take away. He wrote another line. Correct. Clean. The silence deepened. Even those who had smirked now shifted in their seats. Unease replacing amusement. Lawson's tone sharpened. You seem very sure of yourself, Carter. Almost rehearsed. Funny how confidence can look a lot like memorization. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Cheating. The twist landed. A few students gasped softly, their shock audible. Others whispered again, the suspicion catching like fire. Malik froze, his chest tightening. He wanted to shout, I didn't memorize this. I studied. I worked harder than anyone here. But speaking would only feed Lawson's narrative. So instead he turned back to the board and wrote the next line. The clarity of it. The precision silenced the whispers almost instantly. Lawson's smirk faltered. For the first time, a flicker of frustration crossed his face. Malik seized it. He pressed forward, faster now, his lines of work stacking into a rhythm, a cadence of proof. His mind sharpened, the long nights of study rising in memory like anchors, the lectures he replayed, the equations scribbled in notebooks, the problems solved until dawn. Each step was more than math. It was defiance. Each line was a rejection of every label he had been given. But Lawson struck again. Sloppy handwriting, Carter, he said suddenly. You wouldn't want to confuse your classmates with unclear logic. Of course, that's assuming there is logic. The jab was ridiculous, flimsy, but it still drew nervous laughter from a corner of the room. Malik's jaw tightened. His hand trembled for a second before he steadied it. He slowed his writing, made each symbol deliberate, almost elegant. If Lawson wanted to weaponize precision, Malik would turn it into armor. And as he stepped back to glance at the board, the solution was no longer a maze. It was a pathway, and he was halfway through it. The class noticed.
Wait, he's actually got it, Jacob muttered from the back, disbelief heavy in his tone.
A girl near the front leaned forward, whispering, He's better than anyone here. The energy in the room shifted again. The same students who had laughed days earlier now leaned into the spectacle with wide eyes. The tide was turning. Lawson saw it too. His smirk vanished completely now, replaced by a cold glare. For the first time, he seemed less like a teacher and more like a man losing control of the story he had written. He stepped closer, his voice lower, sharper. Confidence can be dangerous, Carter. It makes people forget their place. The words landed with venom. The silence afterward was suffocating. Malik's chest burned, but he didn't stop. He wrote the next line, then another, the rhythm returning. The insults no longer dragged him down. They pushed him forward. Each cruel word fueled his hand. He was no longer just solving a problem. He was dismantling Lawson's authority, line by line. By now the class wasn't whispering. They were silent, riveted. Every sound in the room, the scratch of chalk, the soft thud of Malik shifting his weight, felt amplified. Half the board was filled with his work. The problem was bending to his will, but the hardest part loomed ahead. The section Lawson had designed to break confidence. Malik paused, the marker hovering again. He could feel Lawson's stare drilling into him, the room holding its breath. And in that moment, something inside Malik shifted. The insults, the rumors, the whispers, they didn't weaken him. They lit the fire. He gripped the marker tighter, his voice quiet but steady as he whispered to himself, "Keep going." And he did. Instead of crumbling, he turns the insults into fuel. The marker slid across the board with sharp certainty now. Each line deliberate, each step unfolding with the rhythm of someone who no longer questioned if he belonged. Malik was in motion, his body leaning forward, his hands steady, his breathing controlled. The once chaotic problem was transforming in front of the class's eyes, where tangled expressions had loomed like a wall. Malik was chiseling doorways into it, turning confusion into clarity. The silence in the room had changed too. It was no longer filled with skepticism. It was filled with awe. Jacob leaned forward in his chair, his usual smirk gone. His whisper carried more respect than ridicule. He's not just solving it, he's teaching it. Students who had spent days spreading rumors, calling Malik a pretender and a quota kid, were now scribbling in their notebooks, copying his steps so they wouldn't fall behind. The irony wasn't lost on Malik. These were the same classmates who had once snickered at his hesitation. Now they were learning from him. And yet, Malik didn't turn to acknowledge them. He kept his eyes on the board, his thoughts racing ahead of his hand, his mind navigating the problem like a map he'd already studied. For a brief moment, the memory of his late nights at the kitchen table flashed before him. The hours spent hunched over notebooks, the exhaustion in his bones, the whispered encouragement of his mother. All of it had led here. Each stroke of the marker was more than math. It was vindication. But Lawson couldn't allow the silence to favor Malik for too long. Well, he drawled, stepping closer, arms folded. Look at Carter moving so quickly. One wonders, did he practice this exact problem at home? Did he get lucky? The accusation hung in the air like a toxin. Some students shifted uncomfortably, but no one laughed. Malik didn't flinch. He didn't turn. He simply wrote the next line, his movements precise, his logic airtight. The problem was bending to him, not the other way around. The class noticed. Their silence became heavier, less complicit. For the first time, it was Lawson who seemed out of place. By the 10th line, the solution was undeniable. Malik had maneuvered the problem into its final form. Every step valid, every choice intentional. He paused briefly, his chest rising and falling, then pressed on. Whispers began to rise. Not mocking now, but reverent. Dude, he's killing it. I couldn't even start this. Lawson thought he'd fail. The shift was palpable. The labels that had once clung to Malik, diversity admit, pretender not that smart, were dissolving in real time. In their place came a dawning respect, tinged with guilt. Lawson's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, voice sharper this time. Careful, Carter. One slip and it all collapses. That's the thing about brilliance. It burns bright until it crashes. But the class didn't echo him anymore. They weren't laughing. They weren't whispering his cruelty back and forth. They were watching Malik. Malik finished another line. Correct. Clean. Unassailable. He glanced briefly at Lawson. Not with arrogance, but with quiet defiance. Then he turned back to the board. Unexpectedly, the twist came from the front row. Sarah Miller, one of the top students in the class, and someone Lawson had always favored, raised her hand. Mr. Lawson, she said carefully. That step? I didn't know you could approach it that way. The room stilled. Sarah wasn't mocking Malik. She was acknowledging him, publicly. Lawson's expression froze, then cracked into a forced smile. Yes, well, mathematics has many approaches, some more conventional than others. The dismissal fell flat. Everyone had seen what had just happened. Malik had outpaced even the students Lawson championed. Malik pressed forward. Step after step, the problem unraveled under his hand. His writing was steady, confident, a rhythm that carried the class with him. What had begun as a trap was turning into a performance of undeniable genius. Every second shifted the balance of power. Lawson's authority was thinning, while Malik's presence expanded with each line written. The final steps came into view. Malik slowed deliberately now, making each stroke clear, refusing to let nerves rush him. The problem was almost solved, its tangled chaos distilled into a precise, elegant answer. Behind him, the class held its collective breath. Even those who had mocked him earlier leaned forward, their notebooks forgotten, their eyes locked on the board. It wasn't just about the answer anymore. It was about the transformation they were witnessing. A student they had underestimated dismantling the prejudice stacked against him. Malik set the marker down for a moment, wiped his palms against his jeans, and then drew the final line. The answer appeared with simple clarity, the kind that couldn't be debated or denied. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was recognition. Jacob let out a low whistle. Man just did the impossible. A few others nodded, their faces carrying awe, some even shame. They knew what they had said about him. They knew what they had believed. And now, their certainty had crumbled. Lawson, however, wasn't clapping. He wasn't nodding. He wasn't smiling. His jaw clenched tight, the vein in his temple throbbing. He had orchestrated the trap with precision. And yet here Malik stood, not humiliated, but triumphant. The class was on the brink of applause, but Lawson stepped forward, his voice sharp and cold. Interesting solution, Carter. Very elaborate. But sometimes, elaborate steps are a way to cover mistakes. It was the last thread he could cling to. Doubt. Malik turned slightly, meeting Lawson's eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence, his completed work, and the board filled with flawless logic were louder than any rebuttal. The class sat in tension, waiting. Would Lawson admit what they all saw? Or would he twist again? Lawson's fists tightened behind his back. His jaw worked. The teacher clenches his jaw, searching for a final way to discredit him. For a long moment, the classroom stood still. The whiteboard, covered edge to edge with Malik's work, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Each line flowed into the next, with precision. Every step a thread woven into a tapestry of undeniable logic. Malik stepped back slightly, marker still in hand, his chest rising and falling. He stared at the solution he had built, the final answer resting at the bottom in sharp, clean strokes. It wasn't just correct. It was elegant, the kind of solution that revealed mastery, rather than luck. The silence that followed was different from the silence of doubt or mockery. It was reverence, the kind that came when people realized they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Then it happened. Jacob broke the quiet with a low whistle. Holy, he really did it. Sarah nodded slowly, her voice carrying through the room. That's flawless. And like a spark in dry grass, the recognition spread. Students clapped, at first hesitant, then louder, until the entire class erupted in applause. Desks rattled as hands struck together. Voices rose in cheers. And for the first time, Malik wasn't invisible. He was the center of gravity, the undeniable force that had silenced every rumor and whisper. The applause grew louder, echoing against the walls. Some students stood, others laughed in disbelief, their faces wide with shock. Even those who had whispered pretender days earlier now joined in, swept up in the undeniable weight of the moment. Malik's heart pounded, not with fear, but with something new: relief, vindication, power. For once the whispers weren't chains. They were gone, burned away by the roar of approval. He didn't smile. He didn't bask. He simply stood there, breathing in the sound, the noise vibrating through his bones. But at the front of the room, Lawson did not clap. He did not smile. His face was taut, jaw clenched so tight that the vein in his temple bulged. The applause wasn't just for Malik's solution. It was rebellion, an unspoken acknowledgement that Lawson had set a trap and failed. His authority, once absolute, was cracking before his eyes. He slammed his palm against the desk sharply. The applause faltered. The noise ebbed, leaving only the sound of nervous shuffling. Enough, Lawson barked. His voice was low but sharp, slicing through the last of the cheers. Sit down, all of you. The students obeyed reluctantly, though their eyes darted toward Malik, their admiration still alive beneath the forced quiet. Malik remained standing by the board, marker in hand, his breathing steady. Lawson stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Impressive, Carter. Very impressive. If it were authentic. The class froze. The accusation wasn't direct. Not yet. But it lingered with poisonous intent. Malik's fingers tightened around the marker. He knew this was coming. He had seen the flicker in Lawson's eyes, when the problem had started to bend under his hand. The teacher couldn't let the moment stand. To admit defeat would be to admit bias. Lawson circled slowly, his words deliberate. One wonders how a student who freezes under pressure last week suddenly performs like this. Almost as if he let the words hang. Someone had outside help. The twist landed like a slap. Gasps broke out. A few students whispered to each other, unease returning. Jacob spoke up sharply from the back. Come on, man. We all saw him do it. Nobody helped him. Lawson turned, his smile thin. Watch your tone, Mr. Whitfield. Respect your teacher. But Jacob didn't back down. Respect goes both ways. The tension snapped taut, the class caught between awe and fear. Malik's heart pounded. Part of him wanted to shout, to demand recognition for the hours of study, the sleepless nights, the endless determination. But another part of him knew shouting would hand Lawson exactly what he wanted. An outburst, a crack in the image Malik had built today. So Malik stayed silent. His silence carried weight, heavier than any protest. He turned slightly toward the board, tapped the final answer with the tip of the marker, and then set it down calmly on the ledge. The gesture was clear. The proof is there. You can't erase it. The class held its breath, watching the quiet defiance unfold. Lawson's jaw twitched. The authority he once wielded so easily was slipping. But desperation was a dangerous thing, and he wasn't finished. You solved it. Yes, Lawson said, voice sharper now. But brilliance without integrity is nothing. For all we know, Carter, you've memorized problems like these from less than honorable sources. The implication was unmistakable. Cheating. Gasps erupted again. Sarah shook her head immediately. No. I've studied with him. He works harder than anyone. Others nodded, murmuring agreement. The class wasn't convinced by Lawson's attack, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Malik turned to face Lawson fully, his eyes steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. Instead, he said quietly, "The board doesn't lie." The simplicity of the words landed harder than any heated defense. It was a declaration not of anger, but of truth. The students shifted again, their gazes snapping back to the flawless solution covering the board. The evidence was undeniable, but Lawson's eyes burned. His jaw clenched tighter, his fists balled at his sides. The room was alive with tension. Malik had won the respect of his peers, but Lawson refused to let the victory stand. The applause that had shaken the room minutes earlier now hung in memory, fragile and flickering. Lawson stepped forward again, his tone cold, calculated. Then let's test just how much of this brilliance you can replicate, Carter. Because one performance doesn't make you worthy. The class fell silent again. Malik could feel the challenge in the air, the blade being sharpened for another strike. But the teacher refuses to admit defeat, and tries one last attack. The board was still covered in Malik's flawless solution, every line a monument to the hours of unseen labor he had poured into his studies. But instead of recognition, the room filled with a heavy silence, as Mr. Lawson's words lingered like poison in the air. For all we know, Lawson repeated slowly, his eyes boring into Malik, this solution was memorized. Lifted from some source you found online. That's not brilliance. That's dishonesty. The accusation didn't just attack Malik's performance. It attacked his character, his integrity. And in a school where whispers already spread like wildfire, such an accusation was enough to erase even the loudest applause. The students shifted in their seats. Some frowned. Others looked down at their desks, uncertain how to react. Sarah's eyes widened with disbelief. Jacob leaned forward, jaw set in frustration. "Come on," Jacob muttered under his breath. Though the room was so quiet it carried. We just watched him do it. Nobody fed him answers. Nobody helped him. But Lawson ignored him. He wasn't speaking to the class anymore. He was performing for control, desperate to twist the story back in his favor. Malik stood frozen for a moment, the marker still resting on the ledge beneath the board. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had expected this. He had known Lawson wouldn't admit defeat easily. But hearing the accusation out loud was like being struck in the chest. Memories flashed. The long nights at the kitchen table. The glow of the laptop as he rewatched lectures until dawn. His mother whispering encouragement through her exhaustion. None of it was visible here, in this classroom. None of it mattered to Lawson. To him, Malik's work could only be explained by dishonesty. Because brilliance, in Lawson's eyes, wasn't supposed to look like Malik. Lawson stepped closer to the board, tapping Malik's solution with the tip of his finger. Convenient, isn't it? Every step neat, rehearsed, almost as though you practiced this exact problem before walking in today. How else does someone who stumbled last week suddenly pull off perfection? The word stumbled stung. It dragged Malik back to that humiliating day. The laughter, the whispers. Lawson was trying to weaponize his past mistake against him, to turn triumph into fraud. The room was so quiet that even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder. Unexpectedly, Sarah spoke up from the front row. "Mr. Lawson, with respect, Malik's steps aren't memorized. They're logical. He simplified the equation differently than I would have. If he had just copied this, it wouldn't look like that." The defense broke the silence, startling the class. Heads turned toward her, then back toward Malik. For a moment, hope flickered, but Lawson's smile only tightened. "Ah, Miss Miller. Always so eager to defend classmates. Tell me, do you think logic alone explains this? Or is it possible he's simply clever enough to mask where he's pulling from?" Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it, her face flushed. Lawson had shut her down neatly, reasserting his control. Jacob slammed his pencil onto his desk. "This is messed up," he said loudly. "You can't keep moving the goalpost. First you said he couldn't do it. Now he did it. And you're saying he cheated." "Mr. Whitfield," Lawson snapped, his voice sharp, "another word out of turn, and you'll find yourself in detention. Understood?" The class fell silent again. But the unease lingered. The students weren't convinced by Lawson's accusations, but they weren't ready to openly defy him either. His authority still carried weight, even as it cracked. Malik inhaled slowly, forcing air into his lungs. His mother's voice echoed faintly in his memory. You let your work speak louder than their hate. But Lawson wasn't letting the work speak. He was trying to bury it under suspicion. Malik knew he couldn't meet this attack with anger. Anger would confirm the image Lawson wanted to paint. He had to find another way. He stepped closer to the board, lifting the marker again. His voice was quiet but steady as he said, "Then let's do another one." The words froze the room. Gasps erupted. Jacob grinned in disbelief. Sarah's eyes widened. Even students who had stayed silent leaned forward now, their curiosity piqued. Lawson blinked, thrown off for the first time. "Excuse me?" Malik turned, facing him directly. His voice carried more strength this time. "If you think I memorized this, give me another problem, right now, different from this one. I'll solve it in front of you. No notes, no help, just me and the board." The class erupted in murmurs, excitement buzzing like electricity. For the first time, Lawson's composure cracked. He hadn't expected Malik to challenge him outright, not with such calm conviction. The students were watching him now, not Malik. If he refused, it would look like weakness. If he accepted, he risked Malik proving himself twice. His jaw tightened. His eyes flickered toward the class, then back to Malik. "You think you can dictate how this class runs?" Lawson snapped. "You don't tell me what to do, Carter." Malik didn't flinch. He simply repeated, "Then give me another problem." The room was so tense it felt like the air itself might shatter. Lawson turned back to the board, grabbing a marker with unnecessary force. He scrawled another equation quickly, this one even more complex. Symbols layered on symbols, designed to intimidate. His strokes were jagged, his movements rushed. "There," he said, tossing the marker onto the ledge. "Show us again, if you can." The class fell silent, every eye flicking from the new problem to Malik. Malik studied the board. The problem was brutal, more chaotic than the first. Lawson had deliberately written it to overwhelm. For a flicker of a moment, fear rose. What if I can't? What if this is where I break? But then just as quickly, calm followed. He had faced chaos before, both in numbers and in life. This was just another wall to dismantle. He picked up the marker again, his grip firm. "Fine," Malik said, his voice quiet but cutting through the silence. "Let's go." The class held its breath. The students' response leaves the room breathless. The second problem loomed across the board, jagged and chaotic, a tangle of symbols written hastily in Mr. Lawson's sharp strokes. It wasn't just complex, it was hostile, designed to overwhelm rather than teach. The marker rested heavy in Malik's hand as he studied it. Behind him, the class sat frozen, breaths held, eyes darting between the board and Malik's calm face. The weight of expectation pressed down again. But this time, Malik didn't feel small beneath it. He felt steady. He remembered his mother's words, whispered in the kitchen at midnight. Make perfect look effortless. Show them what they can't take away. Malik took a step closer to the board and began, his voice clear and steady. "First," he said, "you break this into parts. It looks messy, but it isn't. Not if you know where to start." His marker moved in quick, precise motions, circling sections of the problem. He spoke as he wrote, explaining the reasoning as though guiding the class down a pathway only he could see.
You separate these terms. Don't try to fight the whole thing at once. Look at what cancels out.
He paused, underlined a section, and the mess already began to shrink into something less intimidating. The class stirred. "Wait, he's teaching it," one student whispered. "I didn't even see that," another muttered, leaning forward. Lawson's face tightened. He hadn't expected Malik to explain. He thought Malik would either stumble in silence or scribble without clarity. But Malik wasn't performing tricks. He was pulling back the curtain, showing mastery. Step by step, Malik unfolded the problem. His voice never wavered. "Now you apply substitution here," he continued, writing neatly. "That clears this section and makes the next step simpler." He turned slightly toward the class, meeting their eyes briefly before returning to the board. His calmness was startling, not just to them, but to himself. He had spent weeks suffocating under whispers, shrinking under ridicule. But now, standing here, numbers spilling effortlessly from his mind, he wasn't small. He filled the room. Sarah raised her hand slowly, hesitant. Malik, why would you substitute there instead of reducing first? Malik nodded, not dismissive, but respectful. You could reduce first. But if you do, you'll end up with longer expressions. This way is cleaner, faster. Gasps rippled. Students scribbled furiously in their notebooks, realizing Malik wasn't just answering. He was offering insights Lawson had never given them. Jacob muttered from the back, Nan's running the class better than the teacher. The tension broke into quiet chuckles. This time not at Malik, but at Lawson. Lawson stepped forward, his voice sharp. Don't get carried away, Carter. You've rehearsed a single path. Real brilliance means flexibility. Malik didn't even flinch. He underlined another line and said calmly, Then let's test that. Instead of continuing his original path, he backtracked 2 lines and showed a second method, reducing before substitution. The board filled with a parallel track of logic, both leading to the same simplification. The class erupted in whispers again. He just solved it 2 ways.
That's insane.
No way you memorized that. Lawson's composure faltered. His smirk disappeared entirely, replaced by a clenched jaw. He looked less like a teacher now and more like someone cornered. But Malik didn't stop. He pressed forward, explaining as he went, his tone calm, patient, almost gentle. This is the point where most people freeze, he said, drawing a line. But it's just a trick. You rearrange the terms like this. The board shifted again, the chaos dissolving into clarity. By the final steps, Malik had turned the monstrous equation into a simple, elegant answer. He circled it cleanly, then set the marker down. He turned, not toward Lawson, but toward the class. Memorization doesn't give you choices, he said quietly. Understanding does. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples across the room. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah's voice rang out, clear and unwavering. He's right. Others followed. He actually understands this better than anyone here. You can't fake that. He just taught me more in 10 minutes than Lawson has all semester. The murmurs swelled into open voices, students speaking not in whispers but in solidarity. Malik wasn't invisible anymore. His voice had cracked through the silence that once suffocated him, and now others were echoing it. Lawson's face burned crimson. He slammed his hand on the desk, but the sound didn't silence the room the way it once did. Instead, the class's voices only grew louder, their admiration for Malik overtaking their fear of Lawson's authority. For the first time, the teacher realized the power in the room no longer belonged to him. Malik stood tall, his hands at his sides, his expression calm but resolute. He had not shouted. He had not argued. He had simply shown the truth, and the truth could not be silenced. Lawson's eyes darted across the room, the applause and admiration not directed at him, but at the student he had tried to humiliate. His authority, carefully built on fear and control, was crumbling. The teacher realizes the class has turned against him. The classroom was no longer the same space Malik had walked into that morning. Just hours earlier, it had been a place of whispers, laughter at his expense, and suffocating silence when he needed allies. Now it pulsed with something different, resistant. Lawson's authority, once absolute, teetered on collapse. His jaw was locked, his hands gripping the edge of his desk, but his voice, sharp and cutting only minutes ago, had been swallowed by the sound of students openly speaking against him. Sarah leaned forward in her seat, her face firm. We all saw it, Mr. Lawson. Malik didn't cheat. He didn't memorize. He explained every step. If that's not brilliance, what is? The words struck like a match, igniting courage in others. A boy in the back row raised his hand, not timidly, but defiantly. Yeah, you always overlook him, like he doesn't exist. But today he showed more than anyone else in this class. You can't just brush that off. Jacob leaned back, his voice louder, bolder. This isn't the first time either. You've been on him all semester, calling him out, ignoring him when he has the right answer. We've all seen it. The room stirred with murmurs of agreement. Students who once avoided eye contact now raised their heads, emboldened by the shift. Lawson's face flushed. Enough, he snapped. This is still my classroom, and I will not tolerate disrespect. But the words rang hollow. The tone that once silenced now fell flat. A girl in the second row spoke softly, but her voice carried. Respect is earned, sir. And right now, Malik's earned more than you have. The silence that followed was not compliance. It was solidarity. Malik stood frozen near the board, his heart pounding. For weeks he had been an island, carrying humiliation alone. To hear his classmates finally speaking, finally acknowledging what he had endured, was overwhelming. He hadn't asked for their defense, but the sound of it cracked something open inside him. The isolation was shattering. His throat tightened. He wanted to thank them, but the moment was too fragile, too electric. He stayed silent, letting their voices rise instead. Lawson tried again, his words sharper, more desperate. You think you understand teaching? You think you can question me? I've taught for 20 years. I know the difference between real ability and rehearsed performance. But Sarah stood again, her voice louder now. Then maybe 20 years is too long if you can't recognize talent when it's right in front of you. Gasps filled the room. Sarah had been one of his star students, someone he often praised. For her to turn on him was a fracture in his power he couldn't repair. The unexpected twist came when Malik's quietest classmates spoke, the ones who rarely said a word. Daniel, a boy known for his silence, raised his head. I used to think Malik was just quiet because he didn't care. But now I realize he was quiet because you never gave him space to speak. You made us think he didn't belong when the truth is, he's better than all of us. Heads nodded. Murmurs spread. For the first time, Malik's invisibility was gone. They weren't just seeing him. They were admitting they had been complicit in erasing him. Lawson's composure cracked fully. His voice rose, shrill with anger. This is insubordination. You're all ganging up on me because you don't understand standards. Carter is not a genius. He's a pretender who got lucky today. But the words no longer carried weight. Jacob shot back instantly. If this is luck, then I wish I was this lucky. You set him up to fail, and he crushed it. That's not luck. That's skill. And you just can't stand it, because of who he is. The word who hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew what Jacob meant. The air shifted. For weeks the racism had been subtle, hidden under sarcasm and dismissals. Now it was being called out directly, dragged into the open, where it couldn't be ignored. Lawson froze, the accusation stinging, his face paling under the weight of 30 eyes staring at him. Not with respect, but with suspicion. Malik's breath caught. The word he had carried silently, the truth he had swallowed again and again, was finally spoken aloud. Not by him, but by his peers. The students' voices grew louder, overlapping. You target him. You single him out. You act like he doesn't belong because of what he looks like. Each statement chipped away at the wall of Lawson's authority. For every word he had used to diminish Malik, the class now threw two back at him, sharp and undeniable. Lawson slammed his hand against the desk again, louder this time. Enough. His voice cracked, raw with desperation. But no one stopped. The dam had broken. Even the students who had once whispered the cruelest things, pretender, quota, not that smart, now sat pale-faced, realizing how easily they had been manipulated. The shame in their silence was just as loud as the accusations. Malik finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady, cutting through the noise. You tried to make me invisible, but I'm still here. The room stilled. The words weren't shouted, but they carried like thunder. Lawson opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked less like a teacher now, and more like a man cornered, his authority stripped bare. The class stared back at him, unified for the first time. And then the door opened. Vice Principal Hernandez stepped inside, her sharp heels clicking against the floor. She had been making rounds, but paused when she heard the commotion. Her eyes scanned the room, narrowing as she took in the tension, the flushed faces, the board filled with Malik's work. What's going on here? She asked, her tone clipped. No one spoke at first. Then Sarah pointed at the board. He solved it. Perfectly. Twice. And Mr. Lawson still called him a cheater. Hernandez's gaze flicked to Lawson, who shifted uncomfortably. Jacob added, his voice firm, he set Malik up to fail. We all saw it. And when Malik proved him wrong, he tried to discredit him again. The vice principal's face hardened. She stepped farther into the room, her presence filling the silence Lawson once controlled. Malik stood still, his heart racing. For the first time, the fight wasn't just against Lawson. It was moving upward, into the halls of authority. The school administration is forced to take notice. Vice Principal Hernandez's sharp gaze lingered on Lawson, then shifted to Malik, then to the room of students still brimming with adrenaline. The silence was no longer obedience. It was indictment. Mr. Lawson, she said slowly, her voice clipped and precise, Step into the hallway with me. Now. Lawson stiffened, his face pale but his jaw still clenched. This is being blown out of proportion. Now, Hernandez repeated, her tone brooking no argument. The students watched as Lawson reluctantly followed her into the hallway, his posture rigid, his authority leaking with every step. The door shut behind them with a heavy thud. For the first time, the classroom exhaled. Murmurs filled the space, students whispering to one another, their words carrying shock, relief, even guilt. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the board as though replaying everything she had just witnessed. Jacob muttered, finally, under his breath, but his tone wasn't smug. It was tired, worn from weeks of watching injustice play out in silence. Malik sank into his chair slowly. His chest still burned from the weight of being put on trial, but now, for the first time, he wasn't carrying it alone. His classmates had seen, they had spoken, and someone in power had listened. Out in the hallway, voices carried faintly through the door. Lawson's tone was heated, defensive. Hernandez's was calm but cutting, the measured rhythm of someone dismantling excuses. The students couldn't hear every word, but fragments slipped through, singled him out, created an environment of hostility, unacceptable for an educator. Malik stared at the closed door, his stomach twisting. He had dreamed of this moment, someone finally holding Lawson accountable. But now that it was happening, the reality was heavier than he imagined. The unexpected twist came the next morning. By the time Malik arrived at school, the story had spread, not just among his classmates, but across the building. Students in the hallways whispered about the calculus showdown, about how Malik had outsmarted Lawson, about how the vice principal had pulled him aside. He embarrassed Lawson in front of everyone. They said Hernandez is filing a report. Malik Carter's a genius. He made the whole class clap. The same hallways that once suffocated Malik, with whispers of pretender, now pulsed with something new, respect. At lunch, students Malik barely knew stopped by his table. Yo, that was legendary, one said. Another added, you proved all of us wrong, man. Even those who had once mocked him looked uneasy, their silence carrying apology. Malik didn't revel in it. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, his calm demeanor unchanged, though inside his chest carried both relief and exhaustion. Respect felt good, but it didn't erase the damage of weeks of humiliation. It didn't erase the weight of what Lawson had tried to do. By afternoon, emails had begun circulating. Parents were calling the school. Some had heard from their children, others from fragments on social media, screenshots of the whiteboard filled with Malik's work, shaky videos taken on hidden phones, snippets of students' voices defending him. All of it had escaped the classroom. Why was this allowed to go on so long? What kind of teacher humiliates students instead of teaching them? This isn't just about math. It's about racism. The administration couldn't contain it. That evening, Malik sat at the kitchen table again, but not with textbooks. Instead, his mother placed her phone in front of him, showing message after message from parents she knew through the neighborhood, church, and even the hospital where she worked. They're proud of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Do you hear me, Malik? They're proud. Malik stared at the messages. Words of encouragement, outrage at Lawson, admiration for his resilience. His throat tightened. For so long, he had felt invisible. Now people were seeing him clearly. The following week, Lawson was summoned to a meeting with administrators, parents, and even a school board representative. Malik wasn't in the room, but he didn't need to be. The students who had once stayed silent now spoke with clarity. Sarah described the unfair treatment. Jacob laid out the pattern of humiliation. Daniel admitted he had believed Lawson's bias until Malik proved him wrong. Each voice was a stone stacked onto the weight, pressing Lawson down. When the decision came, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no spectacle, just a quiet announcement. Lawson was being temporarily relieved of his duties pending investigation. The words carried a chill. For Lawson, it was disgrace. For Malik, it was vindication. But Malik didn't celebrate. He sat in his seat quietly, his gaze lowered. Justice had demanded accountability. Yes, but it still left scars. Later that afternoon, Vice Principal Hernandez pulled Malik aside. You should know, she said gently, that your classmates stood up for you. They didn't just describe what happened yesterday. They talked about the weeks before, the patterns. They wanted us to understand it wasn't just one incident. Malik swallowed hard, emotion pressing against his chest. For so long, he had thought no one noticed. But they had. They had noticed. They just hadn't spoken. Until now. That night, Malik lay awake staring at the ceiling, the glow of the streetlights slipping through the blinds. He replayed everything. The humiliation, the whispers, the showdown at the board, the voices of his classmates finally rising. He realized this wasn't just about him. It was about every student who had ever been silenced, dismissed, underestimated. His victory wasn't complete until he used it for more than himself. His hands curled into fists, not of anger, but of resolve. He knew what he had to do. The next day, Malik walked into school, with his backpack slung over his shoulder, his notebooks inside. But there was something else in his step: determination. The administration had held Lawson accountable. The parents had taken notice. But Malik wasn't finished. He was preparing to speak. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had been made to feel invisible. The student prepares to deliver a message no one will forget. The week after Lawson's removal, Jefferson High felt different. The whispers in the hallways had changed again. They weren't about Malik being a pretender or a diversity admit. They weren't mocking laughter echoing after class. Now students said his name with weight. He's the one who beat Lawson at his own game. He's the reason people finally spoke up. He's not just smart, he's fearless. Malik didn't walk taller because of it. He walked steady, calm, his face unreadable. He knew respect given too easily could vanish just as quickly. He had earned every ounce of it, not by asking, not by demanding, but by showing. Vice Principal Hernandez approached him in the cafeteria one afternoon. She leaned down, her voice quiet but firm. "We're having a school assembly tomorrow. The students need to hear from someone who's been through this. Would you consider speaking?" Malik froze. Speaking. He had fought with numbers, with proof, with silence that screamed louder than words. But standing in front of the entire school, with only his voice, that was different. Yet as he met Hernandez's steady gaze, he realized this was the moment he had been preparing for without even knowing it. "I'll do it," he said quietly. The next morning the gym buzzed with the restless energy of hundreds of students. The bleachers filled, teachers lined the walls, and administrators sat stiffly near the stage. The hum of chatter died when Malik stepped to the podium, his hands gripping the edges tightly. He scanned the crowd. Faces stared back, some curious, some skeptical, others full of expectation. Among them he saw Sarah, Jacob, Daniel, and others who had stood up when he couldn't. Their presence steadied him. Malik took a deep breath. His voice, when it came, was calm but clear. "I was never supposed to speak here," he began. "At least, that's what I was made to believe. I was supposed to sit quietly, to shrink, to carry the weight of other people's expectations about who belongs and who doesn't." The gym fell silent. Every ear tuned to him. For weeks I listened to whispers, people saying I wasn't smart enough, that I was only here because of diversity, that I didn't deserve my seat in that class. And I let those whispers sink into me. I almost believed them. He paused, letting the words settle. His chest tightened, but he pressed on. "But here's the truth," Malik continued, his voice growing stronger. "Brilliance isn't owned by one kind of person. It isn't locked behind skin color, or background, or where you come from. It belongs to anyone willing to put in the work, to anyone who refuses to give up when the world tells them they should." Applause began, small at first, then spreading. Malik raised his hand slightly, not to silence it, but to hold the moment steady. "And if someone tries to make you invisible, if someone tries to humiliate you," Malik leaned forward, his voice dropping but carrying through the gym. "Don't let them define you. Prove them wrong, not with anger, not with violence, but with undeniable truth." The unexpected twist came when he paused, then gestured toward the chalkboard set up beside the stage. The school had rolled it in as a prop, almost symbolic. Malik walked over, picked up a stick of chalk, and faced the blank surface. "This is where it started," he said, his voice softer now. "At a board, with someone trying to tear me down." He wrote quickly, the chalk scratching as numbers appeared. It wasn't a calculus problem this time. It was a simple equation, something every student could follow. At the bottom he wrote the answer: future. The gym erupted. Malik stepped back, dust on his fingertips, his heart pounding. He turned to face the crowd again. "I can't change what happened to me, but I can ask all of you something." His eyes swept the room. How many voices are being silenced every day before brilliance can shine? How many students never get the chance to prove themselves because someone decided they didn't belong? The applause faltered into silence again, not from dismissal, but from reflection. His words hung heavy, demanding thought. In the front row, administrators shifted uncomfortably. Teachers stared at the floor. But students stared at Malik with something else: recognition. They weren't just hearing his story, they were finding pieces of their own in it. Sarah wiped a tear from her eye. Jacob sat forward, his fists clenched, not in anger but in pride. Daniel whispered, "He's right," to no one in particular. When Malik stepped away from the podium, the gym exploded into applause again. It wasn't the hesitant clapping of disbelief, like in the classroom. It was thunderous, unrelenting, the sound of respect earned. He walked back toward his seat, his heart heavy and light. All at once, Denise, his mother, stood near the gym doors, tears streaking her cheeks, pride radiating from her. Their eyes met, and Malik knew he hadn't just spoken for himself. He had spoken for her, for every sacrifice she had made, for every quiet word of encouragement that had kept him going. Later, as the gym emptied, Malik lingered near the chalkboard. The word future still stood out in white against the black surface. He reached out, touching the chalk dust with his fingertips. This time, he hadn't been called to the board as a trap. He had chosen it. He had claimed it. And as he turned away, walking back into the hallway, his footsteps echoed differently. They no longer sounded like retreat. They sounded like arrival. The story closed where it had begun, in a classroom, at a board. But the image was different now. Malik wasn't shrinking under humiliation. He was writing his own future. Viewers are left asking, how many other voices are silenced before brilliance can shine? No one should have to fight this hard just to be seen. If Malik's story moved you, let it be a reminder. Silence only protects injustice. Type yes if you believe every voice deserves to be heard, and subscribe if this broke your heart.